Welcome to Storm Tracker, your eye on the storm of your Carolina Hurricanes, and your home for the best insight and analysis to keep you totally informed on what's happening with the Canes. Whether it's the latest news on the ice or off the ice, we've got you covered. Now let's begin. Here's your host, Tom Ray.
Well, here we are, and good to be back again. I've been out for a few weeks here, and it's great to be back talking hockey, particularly as we are fast approaching the season start for the Hurricanes. This week, of course, the Canes will be playing Tampa both Friday and potentially Saturday. That's a bit of an interesting one. Obviously, with Hurricane Milton coming in towards Tampa, we don't know what that's going to mean in terms of this game on Saturday night. But certainly our thoughts, prayers going out to the folks who are going to be dealing with that later this week. You know, we've seen a lot of exciting activity in the last short period of time with the Canes. They finished off the exhibition season quite nicely, beating the Nashville Predators with a kind of a youngster-built team and up against the top players for the Preds, and I thought that was a good way to finish camp. I thought it was a strong performance by several players in that game. And of course, we now take a look at what's the lineup going to be. There have been moves on the roster. We'll talk about that, and some questions about one of the big areas for the Hurricanes, and that's the fourth line. There's been a lot of discussion about how that's going to come together, and then ultimately we'll talk about where we think the Canes are going to be this year, and kind of share that with some of the pundits that have come out and said what they think will happen with the Hurricanes this year. So that's going to be a lot of fun. But let's kick it off. So a lot of roster moves recently. Erin, what do you think about the moves the Canes have made?
It's been an interesting offseason for sure. I think that there were a lot of questions going into it because they had a lot of work to do. And we talked about a lot of that in our various discussions of, you know, what the offense was going to look like, what the defense was going to look like. I think that defensively, we've got as solid a blue line as we ever had. It's still going to be Slavin and Burns. It's still going to be Orlov and Chatfield. The newcomers, Ghost and Walker, have the coolest pairing name in the league. So, and they're also working quite well together. Forward, I know everyone is looking at the Canes forwards and saying maybe still a little bit weak in that top nine. We'll have to see how that works out. I did like William Carrier a lot when we saw him in the preseason. I think he fit really well with Martinook and Stahl, and he complimented them pretty heavily. He said, I've seldom had, worked with people that work harder than I do. So, I think that's going to be a good mix there. So we'll just have to see how things pan out.
Well,
I definitely think that
Sorry, Katie, go ahead.
I was just saying, I definitely think that the Canes are in a they have a good foundation upon which to build, and it'll be really interesting to see how the different pieces and parts work together, create chemistry together, and are able to do their roles as effectively as possible. But like I said, the foundation is good, and that's where you want a team to be at the beginning of a season. Is you want that base to be really, really solid. Yeah. And I think the Canes have one of the best foundational groups in the entire league.
Well, and a lot of roster moves too along the way. We saw some interesting Eric Tulsky work and some gyrations that had to happen as they tried to get under the cap and get the players in the lineup that they're looking to do. We saw some PTOs that moved on. Rocco Grimaldi, who I think will probably end up in Chicago this year. He was their top scorer last year, was on a PTO. Sam Gagner was also on a PTO, and he's moved on. Now, the interesting signing, of course, was Skylar Brind'Amour. So Skylar Brind'Amour coming to camp. He had been with the Charlotte Checkers last year in the Florida Panthers system. Didn't have a great season kind of point-wise, but again, wasn't used that effectively, I don't think. Came into camp. We saw him in the prospect showcase, and I thought he looked pretty darn good. He was very strong in the face-off dot. He was very responsible defensively. What else would you expect from a Brind'Amour? And he started to show a little bit of offense as well. So Skylar gets a deal. He's on a two-way deal. He'll be down in Chicago, it appears right now. So that's good news. And I think he earned it. I don't think this was anything related to the fact that the coach is his father. But in any case, good to see Skylar on board. Some other players, of course, of note. We had some movement with waivers. The guys all made it through waivers. Ty Smith was there. Josiah Slavin, I thought, was also interesting in camp. I'm not sure what you felt about Josiah. I thought he did a good job. And Ryan Suzuki heading down. So fun to have the Slavins together. I don't know if you saw, he scored a pretty nice goal. So what do you think about Josiah?
That was a pretty cool moment for him, and his brother being there on the ice when he scored. So that was pretty neat.
Yeah, and it's interesting.
I think he had a really solid camp, especially considering where he was coming in at, and he'll be a really good depth forward for them and somebody who can, move up if necessary in case the Canes call one of the top prospects up to the team for a while. He'll be there to hold down the fort and keep things moving in the right direction for the Wolves.
Yeah, and I think, as they tried to finalize everything with the roster, and there were a lot of moves all at once, they came up with a creative way to move some dollars around, and one of them was that they signed Bryce Montgomery to a 3-year entry-level deal. That's kind of interesting. He hadn't been signed previously. He's a guy that, again, I think he looks strong in the prospect showcase. He did last year as well. He's a big player. He plays big. I think he's a good, solid defenseman. Again, right-hand shot. So he's a guy that he gets a deal finally. Not sure where he's going to end up. This is going to be kind of interesting because, of course, the Chicago Wolves are loaded on the blue line so much that Anthony Honka ended up going over to Switzerland. So kind of an interesting situation for the Hurricanes in terms of their defensive depth. He gives them more depth, and we'll have to see where he ends up as well. So the final roster kind of coming together. And the big question, of course, as the roster came together is, what about Jackson Blake? So we're going to talk a lot about Jackson Blake today, but he was the guy that was left off the roster, and that shocked some of us because we thought he had a great camp, both with the prospect showcase and also with the Canes camp, and had earned a spot. So a lot of gyrations going on, but here we are today, and I guess more moves happening today. So it sounds like the Canes put Tyson Jost on waivers.
Yep, that news came out earlier today, and it was kind of a surprise because we had already heard that Brendan Lemieux was injured in a way that doesn't look like he'll be back quickly. So I don't, this wasn't necessarily the only move they could make, but certainly you don't want to rely on somebody being on IR and then you have to make that waiver happen later in the season when there might actually be more of a need for somebody to snap up that player. So I'm sure this timing is partly their hope that he'll make it through. So we'll see what happens with that.
Yeah. Again, they're probably anticipating he's going to make it through waivers. That'll give them flexibility. He'll probably stay with the club right now and act as the extra forward. And again, can be sent down to Chicago without any concern. So that's, again, a smart move by the Canes. If he is picked up, of course, then they'll be out scouring the waivers or trade market as well to try to shore that up for sure. I'm not sure about your thoughts on Jost in camp. I mean, that's an interesting question. We'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes, perhaps. But, again, this was an opportunity for some players that the Canes had signed in the offseason to come in and kind of make their point, try to find a way into the lineup, and we'll see how that plays out. I wanted to, though, hit some of the youngsters that we've seen through the prospect showcase and, of course, the Canes camp. And there were a number of I guess the top prospect group that really showed well, certainly in the prospect showcase and to some extent in the, in the Canes camp. Anybody jump out to you, either one of you, in terms of, the players that you thought of, these young players that were of interest and showed some cool stuff?
I really, really, really enjoyed watching Unger Sorum. And part of why that is because they announced that they were trying him out at center. So for me, that became readily apparent. They were not intending for him to be up with the Canes. They want him to develop in Chicago, and they want him to learn a position. I believe he said he hasn't played since he was 12 or 14 or something like that.
Right.
So that's the Canes putting a lot of trust in them. It's also a bit of a sign that they are a little weaker at center when it comes to their depth. That they want, they need to train somebody who hasn't played center to play the position. But he really stepped up to the plate. It looked like he was taking in all the tutelage from the faceoffs to the defensive responsibilities, and yet still using that high hockey IQ to create plays and to make things happen. In that last game against Nashville, he's made the most beautiful setup for a tap-in goal. It was phenomenal. So I really am excited and encouraged by what I saw from Unger Sorum, and he will be on the Canes roster in the very near future. That's for sure. Just, we got to give him a little bit more time to grow up. He just turned 19, so he's got to grow into himself a little bit more, get a little bit more muscle, and get used to being center, playing in the Canes system, getting used to North American ice as well. And I think he could really just fit the Canes system beautifully within the next probably 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I mean, for me, being that I'm here in Texas and didn't have a way to watch some of these games, especially some of the ones with the prospects, unfortunately, I was still listening on the radio and listening to the various commentary and hearing people talk about them. But the commentary about Unger Sorum that really struck me was when Rod Brind'Amour was talking about trying him at center and putting him at center. It was interesting to me that he said, we want to do this now. We want to have him, try to develop at this now. We can always move him back to the wing if it's not working out, but we don't want to wait 2 years and, when he's ready to come up to the big club and then start trying to play him at center. And the person I thought of when I heard those comments, I'm sure you did too, is Martin Necas, because Necas always wanted to play center, but he did not play center. He wasn't developed as a center. He did play center for the Checkers, but only for that one year that he was there, and then he was immediately with the big club. And even in Charlotte, he was only playing center part of the time. So I think they see that, that talent in Unger Sorum. They want to develop it, and they don't want to wait. They don't want to have him come up to and be trying to learn the speed and pace of the NHL game at the same time that he's trying to learn to play center. So it's just interesting that after the one experience, they've gone a completely different route with Unger Sorum.
Well, Unger Sorum, to me, again, I think you're right, both of you, right on with your comments. He's got the talent. There's no question. The Canes are definitely thin at center ice in terms of their farm system. The guy that had the chance to show something and kind of disappointed at the end was Ryan Suzuki. I was hoping he started off reasonably well, but he kind of ended a little bit soft. And so he's been the guy, and I think that's one of the reasons why Skylar Brind'Amour was signed on as well, to give the Canes a little bit more depth at center ice, because it's definitely an area that right now needs some attention in terms of the prospect base. And Unger Sorum admittedly has the kind of skill. He sees the ice extremely well. Seems like he's a 200-foot player, so he would be a nice possible player to come in at center ice. A couple of other guys that I thought were interesting. Of course, Gleb Trikazov got a hat trick in one of the games in the prospect showcase. And I think he scored in the Canes camp. He's a guy that has elite offensive skill. There's no question. If you watch him, he's just a guy that knows how to do something with the puck. Whether he sets somebody up or whether he's shooting the puck, he's dangerous. And I think for Gleb, the big challenge for him, of course, is to be working on that defensive side of the game. But this guy has skill that you just can't teach. And we saw that in spades. I think he's going to be a nice player. And how about Bradley Nadeau? He started to come on at the end of camp and scored a beautiful goal. What do you think about Bradley?
That shot is amazing. We had heard so much about it. And I know there were highlights and stuff floating out around there, but until you see it, especially in those last couple games that he played in, where he got each of his goals, it's like, okay, I see now where all of the hype was. And I do think a bunch of us got a little ahead and over our skis a bit when it came to the predictions of him making the Canes this year. He definitely needs to fill out some more, especially towards the beginning of camp when they were going up against some more NHL style rosters. You could tell that there was a size and strength difference between him and some of the prospects and the NHL guys. They were just getting muscled off the puck with way too much ease and way too much frequency. So, it's okay. We got a little ahead of ourselves, but still plenty to be excited about with him, especially with that shot. And I mean, if that's how strong his shot is now, imagine once he gets a little older, a little stronger, a little, more little surer in his skates, and it's going to be even better in the near future.
Well, I saw him come along quite a bit during camp. You're right. He started. He was struggling a little bit, as you say. Bigger players, a little bit of a different style game than the college game. But I got to tell you, as the camp went on, and certainly towards the end of the camp, I thought he started to really show some of his true colors. I don't think it'll be long before Nadeau is going to be ready to come up and play for the Hurricanes, and he may even see ice this year. He's a guy that's got elite skill again. So, a little bit behind where we thought he was, but that's okay.
He's very young.
Yes.
He's definitely doing the right things for sure. On the blue line, a couple of quick comments there before we go to the next section. I wasn't so impressed with Scott Morrow. A little bit, but again, he missed part of camp, and I think that was part of the challenge for him. He shows offensive skill for sure, and he showed that in the showcase. He's a guy that can really move the puck. He's dangerous with the puck, but defensively, saw him running around a little bit. And I guess, he's still got to figure out this man-to-man system the Canes have, and that's not the easiest thing.
No, and for a young player, I mean, we've seen seasoned defensemen come into the Canes and be very, very nonplussed by very recently even. I mean, we could think he's back as recently as the Orlov last year. So we know that it's not easy, but I didn't think he was NHL ready, and he definitely doesn't look like he is. That doesn't mean he won't be, though. It's just a matter of where he's going to fit in their structure. So, and he should get lots of opportunities with the Wolves. So
I think that's
give him a year down there to learn the system. And as a lot of people have mentioned, there are a couple of positions earmarked for a certain Russian defenseman, and then most likely Morrow to take the other side. Nikishin because Nikishin's plays on the left, and I believe Morrow plays on the right. Or do I have that backwards? Either way.
Well, interestingly enough,
I think if he shows well in Chicago, I think the Canes are looking to have him be in the lineup come 25-26.
Yeah, he's not far behind for sure. But we'll talk about another guy. Just a quick point on Nikishin. So Nikishin has on occasion been playing alongside Tony D. So Tony D'Angelo versus with that. Oh man, Tony D'Angelo with SKA, which is, I just had to mention that because I thought that was so incredible. But yes, he, of course, on the same team as Nikishin, and both of them can play. On occasion, they do play together, so it's kind of funny to hear. I wanted to mention, though, a guy that I think might push Morrow for a spot with the Carolina Hurricanes soon is Charles Alexis Legault. He and Dominic Fensori, I thought, looked really good. Interestingly enough, last year in the Prospect Showcase, I was all over Dominic Fensori, all over that guy. He had come out of the college ranks. I think he was with Boston U or somewhere. Anyway, he was phenomenal in the camp, like in the Prospect Showcase. He's a smaller player, but boy, he's smart, and he can really move the puck. And one thing I noticed in some of the action this year, they didn't have any reluctance to get him out there killing penalties and in tough, minute situations, which I thought was really a telling point. But Charles Alexis Legault, along with him, was rock solid and showed a lot. Did you like what he did as well, Katie?
Oh, yeah, I definitely did. And he showed no fear, whether it was going toe to toe in the corners with guys or there's that one time he dropped the gloves with that huge enforcer.
Yeah.
I think it was with Nashville. I mean, he has some grit and some snarl to his game that I have to think that Brind'Amour is just dreaming about the day that he's ready to join the Canes, because he's a Brind'Amour style player with just that that toughness, both mentally and in his game itself. And
I thought he was sharp with the puck as well. He was shooting the puck hard. He reminded me of Brent Burns a few times. He'd get the puck, it would be on a stick and gone instantly. And he showed some good offensive moves. He was in on the rush a number of times. He did some really great stuff. And I think he's a guy that's a late bloomer, as I see it. He just seems to get better all the time. And can you imagine, bringing in a guy like Charles Alexis Legault? He's a big player. He's in 6'3", 6'4", 200 plus pounds. And bringing in Alexander Nikishin, the Canes are going to have a couple of very large, tough defensemen that they can bring in.
Yes.
They are going to be frightening, seriously. They're just sitting there thinking, goodness, if we get these guys in the lineup next year, we're going to be looking pretty good. So good stuff on the blue. When you've got players like, Charles Alexis Legault, you've got, Scott Morrow, even Alexei Himasalmi showed some good things in camp as well. Mm-hmm. They got some great young defensemen. So lots of excitement there. And again, they still have the veterans that will be available this year. We talked about them previously. Joakim Ryan, and of course, Riley Stillman, who's been injured a little bit. We haven't seen much of him. He's a solid D. And Ty Smith as well. So Canes deep on the blue. Chicago's going to be loaded. They're going to be dynamite this year. So it's going to be a lot of fun to watch what the Wolves do as well. So, yeah, I think a lot of interesting things in the prospect showcase and in camp with the young players. Clearly, the decision this year was to play the young players a lot in the exhibition games. In fact, Brind'Amour was saying that, he went to the veteran players and said, how much would you like to play? And they said, just a couple of games. That's enough. So he didn't want anyone getting injured. Well, and you think about Drew Doughty, right? So he got injured in an exhibition game and he's out for, looks like, the season. We've got, this is the kind of thing that can happen kind of inadvertently. They're trying not to hit people too hard and they're trying not to do too much. But that's the kind of thing you want to make sure. And I think Brind'Amour's thinking was very smart to say, let's not get these guys out there and put them in harm's way. Anyway, good camps. They've exited camp. They've got the lineup together. And the big question that we've been mulling over, which seems to be getting resolved a little bit as we go, has been that whole fourth line. So through camp, it was pretty clear. Obviously, Jack Roslovic has earned his right to get up on the top line for now. We'll talk a little bit about that with Sebastian Aho and of course, Seth Jarvis. So they form the number one line for the Canes. And of course, we've got Svechnikov, Natchez, and Kokaniemi have been put together as number two. And Jordan Stahl, as we mentioned earlier, with William Carrier, and of course, Jordan Martin. Those guys pretty well locked in for most of camp. Now, having said that, Brind'Amour was saying the other day that he, things will change over time. He was pretty clear about that in an interview. So I think we can expect more of the same, right? So, but that's where we start. That's where we start. And I think the questions we were really mulling over were, what about that fourth line? You've got Jack Drury. Where do you go from there? And I thought it might be interesting for us to talk about the candidates, right? So the candidates, as we saw them, were, of course, Brendan Lemieux, who, great guy for the team last year. He really, was whenever called upon, he was a guy that was a gamer, did some good work for the Canes. So he's back. They signed Eric Robinson and they signed Tyson Jost. And, of course, the youngster that I think showed the most in camp, of course, was Jackson Blake. So who wants to kick this off and talk about those four guys? What about, let's talk about Jackson Blake first. What did we think about Jackson, and what's the situation with
him? Sorry.
Go ahead.
You were breaking up just a little bit there for me, Tom. I'm not sure why. But no, Jackson, I think Jackson Blake, again, I didn't get to see a whole lot of Jackson Blake, but I was hearing plenty.
Yeah.
And it did seem, it was interesting because, I think like Katie referred to, a lot of us had thought, well, maybe Bradley Nadeau would be the one of these young prospects who would have the best shot at making it. But over the course of the games, what we saw, what we heard from Jackson Blake was just tremendous, just being implicated in the play all the time, making things happen, whether he had the puck on his stick or not, which is something really important to look for in young players. And then,
Yes.
the defensive responsibility, not perfect. Rod Brind'Amour said himself, of course, he made mistakes like all the other guys, but he was just so much closer to being that NHL ready player that you're looking for. And, in fairness to the other kids, Jackson Blake is 21 years old,
Yes.
So there's that little difference of maturity between 18, 19 and, somebody who's 21. So I don't think it was surprising that they wanted him to start with the Canes. I don't think it's surprising that he's going to. I think that's exciting. And I think that the main thing that some people were saying could swing the balance one way or the other was, would he get anything above fourth line time? Would it just be, you don't want to take a player like that, play him 9 minutes a night and have him on the bench, but he's going to get power play time from the what we saw today's practice. And because of the way things are in Carolina, just with Rod Brind'Amour being willing to scramble up his lines, and also the reality of injuries and things, I think he will eventually get some time higher up in the lineup too.
Yeah, I really enjoyed Jackson Blake over camp. We saw him a bunch. I believe he played it in 4 or maybe even 5 of the preseason games. So lots of touches, and they moved him all over the place. And I think that was part of the plan, is see how well does he play with this type of line, that sort of thing. And I think he's going to bring a little bit more finishing to that fourth line than the other options would have created. And I wouldn't be surprised if that fourth line gets played a little bit more than what we consider typical fourth line minutes. We know Rod has lots of trust in Drury as his center there. Drury's really worked hard to earn that trust. And so as long as the wingers aren't creating a big problem, I wouldn't be surprised, especially at the beginning of the season, to not put too much wear and tear on the top guys if Brind'Amour doesn't distribute his minutes a little bit more evenly, and especially in games where the Canes have a comfortable, 2-3 goal lead, something like that. He really deploys that fourth line to go out and check and work that puck possession and that sort of thing to keep the play moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I think a couple of things. Here's what Brind'Amour said, which I think is kind of telling and echoes your comment as well, Aaron. He's been maybe one of the better players, if you're being honest about it. He's very noticeable every shift. It's not just shifts here and there. He had the bulk of the scoring chances and was around it. It felt like when he was out there that something good might happen. And, that's exactly the thing that I was thinking as I watched him. He was involved. Like, he was around the puck. Something was happening. He was a guy on the ice, like as opposed to Nadeau, who was kind of on the fringe, some of the other guys. This guy was in the mix. And the other thing I noticed with Jackson Blake, which I love, he didn't have any reluctance going to the net. Like, he was heading right in there. If you saw, he had a beautiful goal that he basically went in, picked up the puck just inside the blue line, made a great move, went in and scored. And that's a goal scorer's goal. This guy, as we know, had a phenomenal college tour with University of North Dakota. He was outstanding. He had 102 points in 79 games in his 2 seasons. And this is the first time somebody has done this in, I think, 30 years that they've had over 100 points for UND forward. And again, 4th rounder, for goodness sakes. This is, again, the wisdom of the crew, Darren York and everybody else, working on that draft crew. So I like the guy a lot. I agree with you totally, Katie. This is an offense guy that can help maybe bring some scoring from the fourth line. And I think he'll mix nicely with Jack Drury. The other thing about Blake, which I watched very closely, and I was watching him like anything throughout the games, he is responsible defensively. It's not like he's just floating around trying to get the puck. He is definitely responsible defensively. And I think as Brind'Amour has said, he's really earned the right. He was a guy that was really making his case, and I'm excited about that. So I think Blake, again, happy to have him on the team to start. He brings more offense, maybe a little bit more fun on that fourth line than Tyson Jost or Brendan Lemieux. Let's move on to a guy that I was really impressed with in that Nashville game, and that was Eric Robinson. So Robinson's a big player. He comes in at 6'2", 200 pounds. His best year, I think, he's like 25 points, 28 points. He's not a big point guy. He did have a 12-goal season a couple of years ago with Columbus, so that's good news. So he can score a little bit. Here's what Eric Tulsky said when they signed him. He's an experienced forward who will add speed and physicality to our lineup. He has also shown that he can contribute offensively, and we're glad to have him. He's a guy that if you watch him, he's got blazing speed. Okay, there's no question, right? This guy can fly. And in the game the other night against Nashville, he showed some really cool things. He got a nice tip-in goal on that play with, of course, Unger Sorum. But he also made some good work, and he scored an empty net goal. He was out there making things happen. He's a penalty killer as well. He's defensively definitely responsible. So I was looking at some of his highlights, some of the previous year's highlights, and a lot of his goals are kind of rush goals where he gets the puck and just gets away from everybody and goes in and scores. So he's a guy that I think he can chip in with some offense, and I like what I saw. What do you think about Eric Robinson, Erin?
Unfortunately, again, I didn't get to see the game, so I did hear them. That was exciting to cheer him on when he was having those moments. But for me, it's more about what we talked about. I think we talked about this briefly during the one of the preseason podcasts that we did. You have to have some guys like Eric Robinson when you get to the playoffs. Whether they do a lot in the regular season or not, it doesn't. Sure, they're going to chip in, like you said. I would expect to see him, get some goals here and there, and I would expect to see him get some of that rush offense going too. Whether it results in a scoring chance or just really hard forechecking, it doesn't really matter because that's what the fourth line is out there to do. But you can't have a fourth line in the playoffs that is all aging veterans and kids. And the Canes have tried to do that a few times, where they've had, maybe a couple of kids and we had Evgeny Kuznetsov centering the fourth line last year. It doesn't work that way when the opposing team's fourth line is three guys who are basically there to make you not want to be on the ice with them. So Eric Robinson, to me, fits the pattern of a guy who makes the other players not want to be on the ice with him. And I think that's going to be really good for them when they get to that point.
Katie?
What'd you like, Katie?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of everything, right? Jack of all trades, master of none. He has a bunch of areas in which he can contribute, but he's not going to jump out at you in one particular area. I think the key, though, in in that description that you read about him is the physicality, and I think that's what really won him one of those roster spots over the other veterans that were competing with him. Is he really has that size and that physicality, because otherwise that fourth line would perhaps trend a little too small, especially when compared to other fourth lines. And he gives them a little bit more weight on the ice, I think. Not necessarily literal weight, but with his presence, they'll be a little, like Erin said, be miserable to play against, because if you're out there against him, you're gonna be feeling it once you head back to the bench. So I definitely think he earned his spot for sure.
To Katie's point, I'm just reminded that the Canes did put out this year. They had the roster heights and weights on the official 23-man roster that was released the other day. Yeah. And there's some changes that were made, and I believe one of those changes is that I think Jack Drury's height is now listed at 5'11", which is interesting because I think he's been listed at 6 feet before. So I think Eric Tulsky wanted to get some exact numbers there. That's my suspicion. But yeah, whether it's 5'11" or 6 feet, the problem is that then when you put someone like Jackson Blake next to him too, and you have, I mean, you got to have somebody on that line that's going to kind of carry the weight and make it, even just as a protection for someone. If Blake is going to be the other winger on that fourth line, as it looks like he might be to start the season, then you don't want to have a small winger on the other side of Jack Drury too, and then somehow we all know Jack is perfectly willing to be physical and fight and protect the kids, but we don't want that to be. We don't want him to be doing that every game.
Yeah, we talked about
we definitely don't.
Yes.
So.
No, for sure.
Move, I think.
No, and I agree with you. I think Robinson. It looks to me like the Canes' direction, and we've talked a little bit about this previously on that fourth line, is again to change the tenor of it a little bit from a traditional fourth line, if you will. And I think the Canes can do that because they have a line that's almost a fourth line with Jordan Staal. Stahl's line is, it's kind of more built like a fourth line, not a big offensive line, kind of makes things happen, gets in on the forecheck, the usual stuff. And I think because you've got Jack Drury, who, is centering this line and a growing talent for the Canes, he's going to get better. And you've got now Blake, who definitely brings the ability to score. And having Robinson, who can get out there and make things happen and maybe open up some space for those guys. I think that line's interesting. And it's the line that I hope they put together. And boy, through a lot of these gyrations, you wondered about it. As we looked at the other two guys who were, of course, Tyson Jost, and we talked a lot about Tyson earlier in the summer discussion around center ice. I liked him a lot when he first came up with the Avalanche. I thought he got off to a good quick start. He had a 12-goal year. He had a 26, 27-point year after that. And again, he was a top draft pick. He was 10th overall in 2016. This guy looked like he had a lot going for him. And you remember that we had the comparative to Bradley Nadeau. Both of them, of course, had torn up junior with Penticton V's and then had an outstanding first year in the college ranks. But again, we hope that Nadeau doesn't go the route of Tyson Jost. Jost, to me, in camp, was given a lot of opportunity. He was given a lot of ice. I think one game he played 20 minutes. So he was seeing a lot of ice for the Hurricanes. They were trying to see if this guy could really step up. They tried him at center ice. They had him on the wing as well. But again, he's just not grabbing it. And I didn't see that. I didn't see him really step up and take hold of a position because it was there for him. He could have won a spot, I believe. But again, he I think did not come through that strongly. So he's been put on waivers. I expect he'll stay with the Canes if he passes through. But it's a good move to give him flexibility in the future. And, of course, Brendan Lemieux, again, he's really an ideal 13th type forward, I think. He's not a guy you want playing every night for you. And I think those two moves kind of made sense. So in the end, I'm a happy camper with Robinson and Jackson Blake on board. And how do you feel about the line in general? I mean, I just made my comments and my thoughts, but what do you think about this idea of, the youngster Blake on a fourth line with Robinson and, of course, Jack Drury? Katie, you got some thoughts?
I think as far as the Canes are constructed, it's perfect because a lot of the work that Stahl's line does is what other teams' their fourth lines do as well. And even though he obviously sees more minutes and has more trust from the coaching staff, a lot of their function is kind of in that fourth line spirit. And so the way that it's constructed, because there is the playmaking of Drury, the talent on the rush with Robinson, the finishing ability with Blake, it's going to be kind of a dual fourth line. They're going to be able to be good defensively when they do need to get out there and perform a grinding role, a dump and chase role, that sort of thing. But when there's a little bit of ice and they're given a little bit of space, they also have enough talent to actually create threats and scoring chances up the ice that other teams' fourth lines might not be able to defend too well and be able to anticipate. So I'm really optimistic. The first 10 games or so, provided things don't get shuffled around really quickly at the beginning of the season,
get the blender going.
A good indicator. Yeah, the Brind'Amour, but as long as he keeps them together to see what kind of chemistry they're able to work on together, I think there's a lot of potential in that line. Just need to give it some time to gel, let them learn each other, let them feel comfortable with each other, and there's plenty of potential there. We'll see whether that potential gets transformed into production, but hey, that's what we're all here for, right?
If nothing else, they're going to be a lot of fun, and I think that's something that it's necessary. I think in a year like this where there's some uncertainties and some naysayers out there, you want to have at least something going on that fans can just wholeheartedly cheer for without having any reservations about what's coming down the line. So it's always so much fun to cheer for a rookie who's made the team. And I think that's going to be something everyone's going to be enjoying and looking forward to.
Well, of course, Eric Tulsky had kind of pre-announced this earlier this summer, talking about the fact that the Canes had not made some additional moves because they wanted one of the prospects to grab a spot. The other thing about that line, just to conclude it, Jack Drury was outstanding in the faceoff dot last year. So he's a guy that can help kill penalties. He obviously can fill in on the power play, and he's a great faceoff guy. So he gives some flexibility when he's sitting on that fourth line. He can come up and help in a number of different ways. So I think that's good stuff. When we look at the lineup in general, forwards, we talked about them. I think they're pretty well set. Not just sure how the situation with Jack Roslovic is going to play out. We know that in the past, Roslovic has started off quite nicely and then leveled off a little bit later on in the seasons. This will be an opportunity, a fresh start for him. And I think he's a guy that, given the chance to get on that big line with now the guy that says, bring me the money or show me the money, I guess it is, whatever. Of course, Seth Jarvis and Sebastian Aho. It's an interesting line. They're a small line, and that's a bit of a concern for me. What are your thoughts about that first line?
I think that putting Roslovic on the first line is primarily about not having Roslovic and Necas on the same line. We've talked about, I think Katie's talked about this before too. You don't want too many of the same kind of players on any one given line, because except for the Stahl line, because they can all be exactly like Jordan Stahl, and that's fine. But we know that with the other lines, you want some balance. And with you have two extremely fast, extremely offensive-minded wingers who both struggle a little bit more defensively than most of the other players in Raleigh. So you don't really want them playing together. So I think what we might see throughout the season, we might see Roslovic, Aho, Jarvis, and then Svech, KK, and Necas, like we are right now. We might see Svech, Aho, Necas, and Roslovic, KK, and Jarvis. I don't think we're ever going to see Roslovic and Necas on the same line unless it's just a wild experiment. So I think that's kind of where they've ended up so far. So we'll see how that goes. I know that Sebastian Aho can more than cover defensively for anything that Jack Roslovic needs to learn as far as being a brand new Cane. So I think he's going to create opportunities with his speed that Seth Jarvis may be in a really good position to capitalize on. So I'm looking forward to seeing that.
I totally agree, Erin. It's I don't think honestly, I think the bottom six are more or less set in stone unless they really can't score at all. But the top six perhaps are a little bit more fluid, and I will be interested to see where Roslovic fits into that, because he is the big question mark. He's the new guy. His game isn't as well known, not just to the fans, but to the coaches and to the players as far as how they're going to feed off each other. But indications are good that it's at least trending in the right direction and that there is going to be some opportunity for success. I will still plant my flag on my soapbox that I think that it should be Aho and Natchez together on a line, and then whoever else you think fits best. And I would say Svetch, because you have somebody defensively minded on the first line with Aho, and then that would put Jarvis on the second line. You have that, and then you have more balance on the size. Tom, you mentioned that first line as it's constructed now is a little on the small side. Are they going to be able to be pushed around, especially, for the regular season, probably fine, no big deal.
Fine.
But
Yes.
when you get to the playoffs, then it gets to be more of an issue. So if you have Svetch up on that top line, then you have some size on that top line, and KK's still there on the second line, and that gives more balance that way on the size. So it'll just be interesting to see how the season plays out, but I wouldn't be surprised after a couple months if the top two lines look different than they do right now. But I hope them all of the success in the world. Obviously, it would be great if what is planned at the beginning of the season is what works out for the entire season. I'm just realistic enough to know that is probably not happening.
How many? What's our over under on it taking more than 30 games to see first line Martinique?
Yeah, that's always the big question, right? And that's something we do not. Roslovic, to me, again, watching him closely in camp, certainly in the games that I could see, he can skate. He's very smart with the puck. He's definitely offensively gifted. There's no question. He can make great moves. The guy scored 20 goals before, so he knows how to put the puck in the net. And I think it's a question of, can he learn this Kane system? And that's always the big challenge. And is he going to be comfortable on that top line as the number one line winger? So he, again, he's vacillated between center and the wing. So we'll have to see how this plays out. But I like the guy. I think he's got potential. Hopefully we can strengthen later in the year at the trade deadline and continue to build on that. I think we need a little bit more strength up there. But I think to start the season, he's fine. The second line, I think it's fine. Svechnikov, Natchez, Kotkaniemi. We've talked about Kotkaniemi a lot. I think they're going to be fine to start the season. They didn't show anything exceptional in camp. Nothing. They didn't play that much in the games, so we didn't see much. Again, we'll see, right? So now,
one of the things that I found interesting from some of the commentators is just their success as a line is going to depend on them learning how to play together. If they have lone wolf syndrome and they're just, Natchez is doing his thing, expecting them to keep up with him, or Kotkaniemi's trying to do his thing, expecting his line mates to read his mind or whatever, it's not going to go well. So they need to avoid that lone wolf syndrome and find a way that they can anticipate each other and play together and be able to trust each other as a unit instead of trying to make things happen on their own.
And I think you're
absolutely.
Right. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right too. That's something that, again, is not the easiest thing to do. And that's one of the reasons why Rod, he constantly says, we got to move people around a little bit because, the chemistry doesn't sometimes work. And I don't remember, I'm trying to remember, certainly Kotkaniemi and Natchez have played a fair bit together and had some success. Remember they had Teravainen on that line and they had some pretty good success. I don't remember if Svechnikov and Natchez have had much success together. I'm not sure about that.
I think 2 seasons ago they did because there were some injuries. There was a time that Aho was out for a while, and that was the season that Svetch was selected to the All-Star game. And then there was the big campaign push for Natchez to be voted in to the All-Star game. So I think there was a small window in which they played together and produced a lot of success, especially when Aho was out injured. But it was, like I said, it was a 2-3 months, something like that. It wasn't long.
Well, the good thing that I noticed on the power play, and they had a fair bit of power play activity, was that Natchez was getting into his wheelhouse and was getting opportunities to fire the puck. And that's on the top power play unit. That's exactly what you want. But that's a nice segue into the final part on the lineup I wanted to talk about, and that's the defensive core. And I really wanted to focus in on Shane Gostisbehere. I think Shane had a great camp. He scored the overtime winner, of course, in one game. But
Right.
he's a guy that he is fitting in to me like a glove. He's just didn't miss a beat. He's right in there, smooth as silk back on the blue, making things happen a lot when he's on the ice offensively. And of course, the way that Sean Walker has been supporting him and working, I think, really focusing on the D side a little bit more because giving Shane the opportunity to ramble. I think that pair is going to be great. But I was really, really pleased with Gostisbehere's work on the power play, and I think obviously this is why Tulsky went out to get him, was to strengthen that part of the game. Did you have similar thoughts on Shane?
Oh, definitely. I thought they looked great. And I'll be the first to admit I was the one who was saying, okay, you got to move Walker up with Slavin and Burns down with Ghost. And
don't forget, that was our lineup.
I'm really worried about.
You had me convinced.
I was really worried that Gostisbehere and Walker were going to be two samey, a left-handed version and a right-handed version of the exact same player, and they were going to get caught in pinches, and they were going to give up a lot going in the other direction. And there was just no indication of that in the preseason. No. They looked like they had instant chemistry with each other and really feel balanced. I mean, in interviews, you would hear Ghost talking about how much he's enjoyed playing with Walker and how they're on the same wavelength. And then you get an interview with Walker talking about how he feels that Ghost really complements his offensive game, and they both have a lot of freedom to really be the type of players that they want to be and feel that they can be. So that's encouraging. So I will definitely say at least early indications are that I did not give them enough credit as far as being a pair together, because they look great and they could end up being one of the top third pairs in the entire league if the trends from preseason carry on over into the regular season.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like the players that were here when Ghost was here before are just so delighted to have him back. Yes. And that's always a good thing when you see that from the room, that they're just, thrilled that this signing happened, and that even in the midst of losing guys like Shea and Pesci that they've been playing with for a long time, this was such a bright spot for them to get somebody in who's kind of familiar with the system already and just picking up right where he left off. So I think that's cool to see that.
Well, when I was watching Brady Shea in the Nashville game, and of course, and I'll say this about a couple of other guys too. Shea, to me, did not look nearly as dynamic as a Shane Gostisbehere. Okay, so he brings the puck up, he gets involved, yes, he does, but he doesn't give you that kind of that excitement that Shane can do. He can really go and take the puck up and make things happen in a hurry. He sees the ice extremely well. But it was weird to see Shea in a Nashville uniform, as it was to watch Teuvo Teravainen score the goal for Chicago last night. So it's kind of odd to see these guys in the uniforms. Right? So, but yeah, but I thought that was funny. And but the point being, if we look at, we talked a lot about this earlier in another podcast about that defensive core, and to me, kind of watching them through camp, watching Walker, watching Gostisbehere, and together and doing their jobs separately. I don't feel really that bad about losing Shea and Pesci. In fact, I like the look of our D right now. I think it's going to be. I think they're going to be very, very strong.
I would agree, and I think that one of the big keys is that we're going to have to be paying attention to and tracking a little bit, maybe for a future conversation. As the season gets going, it'd be really interesting to start tracking the scoring from the blue line, because that was one of those areas it's always been really important to the Canes, and it's one of those areas that last season it just seemed like they weren't getting enough from the defense in terms of goals and assists. So, and you could look at the different charts out there and compare one season to another, but it was a significant enough drop to be noticeable that they weren't getting that secondary scoring and all of that from the defensive guys. And that will tell us a lot. That when we start seeing those numbers come in after 20, 30 games, how much are the D's contributing, how many goals, how many assists, how much is happening on the power play. When we see those numbers, especially the power play numbers, I think we're going to have a good sense of how well this defensive core is contributing to wins, because that's the important thing. So.
Yeah, and again, I think 2 years ago, Brady Shea had 18 goals, and I think Brent Burns had something like 18 or so or whatever. I mean, that's huge scoring from your defensive core for sure.
Absolutely.
And you can't I don't think you can sustain that. That's kind of incredible. But now we've got a much more balanced group because, of course, Jalen Chatfield started to come on last year. He had 8 goals. I think he'll do that or more this year. And certainly you can hope for, Burns will contribute whatever he does. I think double digits is probably reasonable for him as well. And then I think we're going to see some good offensive work from the third pairing. And, you realize that, both Gostisbehere and Walker are going to be up against weaker opponents because, if they're working on that third pairing, the chances are that they're going to face, units that aren't quite as strong. So that could be an advantage for them. And again, both of those guys are happy to motor and go right in on net. So we'll see a lot of that. We'll see a lot of these guys picking up the puck and running with it. And I think the thought behind the Canes this year is that the defense is going to contribute more. So I fully subscribe to what you're saying as well, Aaron.
How long do you think it will be until we hear the announcers say, and there's a 2-on-1 for the Canes up the ice? It's Ghost and Walker together.
That would be pretty good.
That would be pretty good. Put it past them. I think that could happen. Line changes going on, and the two of them just decide to go for it together.
Why not? Yeah. And honestly, when we see those things happening, and when we see those numbers, that's going to put a lot of this in context about how the Canes are going to do this year. Everyone's focusing on, maybe some weaknesses in the forward core, but I don't think the pundits out there, I don't think they're really looking at what our defensive core might be contributing offensively. And that's going to be a huge key to the Canes' success this year. Absolutely.
Big time.
Well, that's a great segue, I think, too, Erin. I wanted to kind of wrap up the discussion by talking a little bit about what the pundits are saying and what do we think about that. I mean, of course, the first volley, which kind of caught us a little bit off guard, was ESPN saying they're going to miss the playoffs. So that was okay. That's a little bit strange. But we've then seen several different analysis come out. We've seen folks like The Athletic with their analysis and saying that the Canes' chance of winning the Cup is 7%. We saw Dom Lucian, who's with The Athletic, come out, and he wasn't so impressed with the Hurricanes. He had them well down. And you had some other folks that also had things to say about the Canes in terms of evolving hockey. I think had them third, fourth, fifth. A lot of these folks are seeing them kind of middle of the pack. They are suggesting they're going to probably fall out in the first round. So they're clearly seeing this as a Canes team that isn't as strong. Now, I've listened to some of the folks on the NHL Network and other places, and some of them still believe the Canes are going to be serious, and they're putting their weight on, of course, Rod Brind'Amour and what he can do with his team. So, interesting kind of differing views here. So what do we think from our side? Do we think any of those folks have really got it right, or what do we think that we might expect the Canes to do this year in the Metropolitan, and how deep do we think they're going to go? Who wants to kick it off?
I'll go because I've been posting about this like crazy. I go around the different sites and I clip the takes from people, and I mean, somebody's got to get it right. There's somebody who's predicted the Canes just about everywhere, from being top of the division to second in the division to maybe wild card to the ESPN take. Now, granted, it wasn't their bold prediction, so they understand that this is a pretty bit of a stretch take, but to the Canes not even making the playoffs. So someone's got to be right, but I'm definitely leaning more in the direction that the analytics people are taking, in that the Canes are going to be one of the top 2 teams in the Metro and still be a threat in the playoffs. And how much of a threat they are, of course, depends on all the normal variables, and also how things go at the trade deadline and what their identity looks like at that point. But
yes,
as I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, the foundation of this team is really, really strong. So whatever they build on it throughout the season is just going to make them better and better.
I think that's a good prediction. I'm gonna say that I want to agree with you about second in the Metro, and the reason I want to agree with you about second in the Metro is because I think that the wild predictions of success for both the Rangers and the Devils can't all be right. You know, you have half the league thinking the Devils are going to end up first in the Metro, and half the league thinks the Rangers are going to end up first in the Metro, and I'm thinking one of them will end up first in the Metro, but I'm not convinced that they're both quite there, and I think that there's some vulnerabilities that may be revealed as the season unfolds, you know, for at least one of the teams. For me, that team is the Devils. I just think that they're too, right now they're too centered or focused on how, you know, this new goaltender of theirs, Jacob Markstrom, is going to do for them. And he is very, very good. And there's no question. But I'm just not sure that that's enough by itself to make them beat the Rangers. And so we'll see what happens with that. I don't see them going any lower than third. Let me put it that way. The people that have them down in fifth place are just crazy as far as I'm concerned. You know, I think they'll be third in the Metro at the lowest, you know. Under the most optimistic, and I like to be optimistic. So under the most optimistic prediction I can make, if the kids are all taking that next step, if Jackson Blake ends up energizing, you know, just everybody, you know, if Brent Burns, you know, has a sword fight with Father Time and banishes him to a closet, all of those things happen. I think the Canes make the Eastern Conference final, and I think they win at least one game this time. So I'm going to go with that.
Okay, well, that's a bold prediction for sure.
That's my bold prediction.
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure out the Devils for sure. Boy, they got a lot of power up front. They've strengthened their blue line. They've got Dougie back. They've got some good pieces with Brett Pesce joining and so on. There's no question that they are a team that are going to have to be reckoned with. There's no question about it. And the question you raised properly is, can they do this all season? We're going to wait and see about that. But they are definitely a team that on paper is capable of definitely competing for the top spot in the division. The Rangers had very few changes. So they're a team that we know what they are. And Shesterkin, who is really the anchor of that team, is looking for a monster deal. I think he was offered $88 million recently, 8 years and $11 million a year, and turned it down. So he's probably looking for a $100 million deal, which is fine. He's one of the best in the game. And as long as they have Igor Shesterkin, they are going to be tough. There's no question. So, yeah, not going to be easy.
No, not at all.
This year is going to be tough. Yeah. But again, I think the Hurricanes are definitely going to be in the mix. I hang my hat completely on Rod Brind'Amour. I think he is one of the top 2 or 3 coaches in the league. And I think he can take any cast of players and get them into the playoffs and compete. So I agree with you on the other point. I think this will be the interesting thing that happens as the season goes on. We know the brilliance of Eric Tulsky. Okay, this guy keeps doing it. He does it. We see it continuously. He's got some plans for the trade deadline this year. And guess what? We may also see Alexander Nikishin prior to the playoffs. So
if that were to happen,
there's every opportunity to strengthen the team.
Yes.
So I think there's the Canes just have to be in the mix at the deadline. They'll make some key moves. They're going to be ready to go. I have every expectation that Tom Dundon is expecting this team to go deep again. He's a guy that he has only one interest, and that's to win the Stanley Cup. So he won't be a guy sitting on the sideline saying, "Hey, that's okay, guys. Don't worry about it. We'll get there next year." He's going to be saying, "Whatever it takes, we've got to get there now."
Absolutely.
So lots of change, and actually that's made it fun and made it interesting.
Yes.
And we've got some different things that are going to happen as we look at Blake joining the team, of course, looking at Robinson. What can he contribute? Will Kokaniemi step up this year? I mean, lots of questions, and we could keep turning and peeling the onion back. But I'm excited. I think we've got a great season ahead. And boy, we're going to have lots to talk about throughout the season, I'm sure. And let the folks stay on top of what's happening with the Canes and how we see this all unfolding. Again, thanks so much for your time, ladies, and we'll catch up real soon.
Great to be here again.
Yep. Can't wait. Let's get this season started.
Absolutely.
Yeah, all going this weekend.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like, subscribe, and tell your friends for everything with the Canes. You need Storm Tracker.